Welcome to Adapted, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is...
Pat?
Today we'll be discussing Henry IV Part 1 from roughly 1596-97, Henry IV Part 2 from about a year or two after that, and Orson Welles' film adaptation of those plays, Chimes at Midnight from 1965. So the Henry IV plays are the middle two plays in the Henriad, which is a set of four that tells the story of the kings of England from Richard II to the conquest of France by Henry V. Henry IV follows the consequences of Henry's assassination of the previous king, Richard II, and then his ascent to the throne. His son, Prince Hal, spends his time in the Boar's Head Tavern, hanging with the dissolute knight Sir John Falstaff, drinking and making very little of his life. Meanwhile, Henry Percy, aka Hotspur, is leading a rebellion in Wales after Henry IV fails to ransom his brother-in-law. This threat to his father's kingdom leads Hal to redeem himself and take on the responsibility of being the future king. In 1960, Orson Welles cast dishwasher Keith Baxter to play Prince Hal in his stage production of Chimes at Midnight, premiering in Belfast, Ireland. After this play closed amidst a number of critical attacks, Welles tricked some producers into letting him film Chimes by telling him that in fact he was making a film version of Treasure Island. He brought bigwigs such as John Gielgud into the production, but kept Keith Baxter in the role of Hal. The film wasn't overly successful. It's sort of been rediscovered and has had a renaissance since then, and has received a lot of critical attention and praise. And so that's these 2, 3, 4 texts. Wells is interesting because he's taking things from the Henry IV plays, kind of mixing them together. He's taking a little bit from Henry V, the play that comes afterwards. He's taking stuff from Holinshed's Chronicles, which was a history written in the 1570s and 1580s that was a big inspiration for Shakespeare's history plays, as well as his main source for Macbeth and King Lear. And Wells is kind of taking whatever he wants, putting them together. He's no respecter of orders, anything like that. And I think it works delightfully. But I do want to start with Henry IV, Part 1. Either this or Richard II are my favorite of the history plays, with Henry V being close behind. I think that this play, I think the reason is there's such a diversity of characters, and there is reasons to dismiss characters as being either immoral or imperfect or wrong, and yet you never do. Even Henry IV, who really does have blood on his hands, is someone you find sympathy for throughout the play. And obviously that's true of Falstaff, you just adore by the end of it. And the conflict that Prince Hal goes through, from enjoying his kind of life with prostitutes and Sir John, to his dismissal of Falstaff and his taking of the throne and becoming Henry V, all of that you understand. I don't think there's a moment where you're like, I think the future Henry V is in the wrong here, and Falstaff is in the right, or something like that. It's sad, but everything makes sense. There isn't a lot of judgment.
There's not judgment, which is what makes, this is what I was arguing in one of these other things that we did last seasons and previous seasons. That's what makes something good, when it raises questions without necessarily giving you answers. Like it doesn't make it easy to reach a conclusion as to who is right, who is wrong. I think we could argue whether does Hal really betray Falstaff? From the very beginning, I think you could argue he does. But there's no judgment. Shakespeare is not telling you what to think about any of them. You could easily make a case that Henry V is a jerk, and basically completely betrays Falstaff and just leaves him in a lurch. You could make the argument that Falstaff is really the awful one, or you can make the argument that it all comes down to Henry IV, or if you go back to Richard, you could argue it's you can. There's a lot of room here to you could argue Hotspur's not totally wrong either. Like
Yeah, and he's not.
and he's not, so there's a lot of well, I mean, there is and there isn't. Should does it make any sense for Henry the Fourth? If Henry the Fourth is going to run his kingdom and keep peace, does it make any sense for him to ransom back the most likely claimant to his own throne? No. This is a question of just basic leadership. If yeah, maybe it's unjust, but it's not imprudent. There is no way he should do that. That would be a disaster for his kingdom. So no, he should not he should not do that. So there, you can make an argument that everybody's sort of right and wrong. It's
But
a
you can
very
understand why Hotspur
yeah.
would be incredibly upset about that.
Yeah, you understand where everyone is sort of why they're making the decisions that they're making, and there's no way that you're just going to sit there and be like, that one is the evil one. Richard, the later ones, which I love Richard, but it's not my favorite, but it's just
Richard the
fun.
Third, we're talking about.
Yeah, Richard the Third. Richard the Third is, we'll get to it in 2 weeks, is just fun. It's just fun. But there's no doubt what you're supposed to think about it. That's Shakespeare telling you what to think about it. This one, he's not. He's being a lot subtler here. And it's a much better play. But it's really, really good. It's a great
Mhm.
play.
Yeah. The best critical assessment of Shakespeare I've ever read, I think most people agree with this, is from John Keats, the Romantic poet, who used the term negative capability, which means something along the lines of sitting back, offering up a conflict without providing a conclusive moral judgment with regard to that conflict, right?
Yeah.
He's putting this against positivistic philosophies that reigned in the Enlightenment, and those would assert a certain truth. This is right, this is wrong, we can figure this out. Keats, being the Romantic, thought that this was kind of silly, and he saw in Shakespeare a parallel mind to those that he saw working in the Romantic tradition, which is we can look at the world and these various conflicts without inserting our judgments into it. And while you're saying this is not true
To
of
be
Richard
fair, to be
III,
fair, one thing I want to throw out. To
Mhm.
be fair, I don't think that Shakespeare lives in a morally relativistic world. Like, I don't think he
He
would say there
doesn't,
is no
no.
right or wrong.
Mhm.
He's just not going to tell you what's
Mhm.
right or wrong. I think that's just one important distinction to make here. I don't think, and again, you can see it in some of his other plays, the less subtle ones. Like Richard certainly has right and wrong. There is good and evil.
And
But
yeah,
this
Richard
one,
III definitely is, yeah,
Richard
good or
III,
evil. Yeah, he's announcing it as broadly
yeah.
as he can.
But it's like a comic book,
Mhm.
early 1940s comic book Lex
Yeah,
Luthor,
yeah,
like or just like it's literally the guy by tying the woman to the train tracks, rubbing his
yeah.
hands gleefully together.
Yeah.
Like that's what Richard the Third is.
Gaslight. That was Gaslight.
Yeah, but it's like that's what's going on with these ones. But I don't think it's relativism. It's not, there is a right and wrong. Shakespeare's just not going to tell you what is right and wrong, and some characters are right sometimes and some characters are wrong some other times, and it's not easy to tell. Sometimes they're doing the right things for the wrong reasons and vice versa. So there is no, it's not that there is no right and wrong. It's that he's not going to tell you, and it's very hard to tell what is right and wrong.
Yeah, and we should mention Shakespeare is working in a Christian ethos. There is
Yeah.
that it definitely informs, especially his tragedies. I think more than anything, is that if evil is in the world, it needs to be kind of flushed out. That I think is evidence of not as you're saying, a morally relativistic world. But I think in this play, maybe more than any of his other plays, I don't know if there's another play where the negative capability criticism is more effective as a heuristic for trying to understand this play. This is the one where I can see
Maybe Richard. Maybe Richard.
Richard two.
The
Richard
second.
two is
Richard
another
2.
one.
I
Yeah,
should be, yeah, Richard 2.
Richard
Richard
the
2 is in
second.
a
Yeah,
similar
yeah,
boat.
and we should say why with Richard the Second. Just not assume our audience knows what that is. But with Henry the Fourth, we can assume they know what it is, which is why maybe they clicked on this. With Henry the Fourth, I think like you can see, as you're saying, you know why Henry the Fourth is not ransoming Mortimer, because Mortimer has a claim to the throne, and that could lead to rebellion, and that upsets the kingdom. But also, he's also kind of doing something a little underhanded. There is something underhanded about it. Hotspur is leading a rebellion that will kill a bunch of people, but Hotspur kind of has a point. There's some justice to him leading a rebellion on behalf of his brother-in-law. Prince Hal has to abandon Falstaff if he's going to become a king. You cannot have a responsible king getting drunk with a bunch of prostitutes all the time. They have to do stuff. They have work to do. They have, they have France to conquer. All these things he needs to do. And Falstaff, and I love how Orson Welles plays him in that last moment in Chimes at Midnight.
Yeah.
Falstaff understands this, and he understands that he must leave his sort of adopted son behind. And yet it's heartbreaking because Falstaff is so lovely, right? And Falstaff's quote unquote cowardness, when he's a coward, so to speak, he makes the best argument for cowardness I've ever heard, which is basically, what is honor? It doesn't sew you up. It doesn't do surgery. It's air. Who has it? He that died a Wednesday, right? It's nothing. And yet honor is a central thing that is needed and important in this society. And especially when you get to Henry V, right? Like you get to the St. Crispin's Day speech in Henry V, and I don't think there's
He
anything
doesn't even
ironic.
want to share it. No, oh, there's nothing ironic. He doesn't
There's
even want to
nothing.
share it.
Mhm.
It's like, I think it's an absolutely sincere speech, and I don't think he's saying it I don't think it's just to buck the people up. I think that is a sincere expression of the same character's experience with honor now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when people quote St. Crispin to be, we need to fight them, right? So we're going to quote St. Crispin's speech to buck up the troops. Shakespeare's somebody we could rally to one of those purposes. It's kind of like, huh, did you read Henry IV Part 1? And when people look at Falstaff's speech from Henry IV Part 1 and they see Shakespeare as a peacenik, it's kind of like, huh, did you read Henry V? It's so wonderful to not really be able to land anywhere, but to see that Falstaff, I think, is entirely correct in what he's saying. And I think Shakespeare is not presenting a straw man when he has Falstaff deconstruct the word honor, which he does 330 years before Derrida was born, by the way. But anyway, that I think is entirely authentic, and it's really really wonderful. And we see this with, we should talk about maybe Richard II, the play that leads up to this. Richard II, we have a king who is a very good man, but makes absurd and arbitrary decisions, which lead to his downfall and the rising up of the person who will become Henry IV. And Richard II is someone who, at first, you're like, why are we reading about this doofus? This guy is a really bad king. But by the end of it, you really see he has this kind of heart of a poet, and you really love this character. And the fact that he gets killed by Henry, and Shakespeare kind of negotiates this. Henry doesn't personally kill him. He sort of says, "Who will get rid of this man for me?" And then people go and
That's
do it.
that's the
The
Thomas of
Thomas,
Becket.
yeah,
That's the
it's the
Thomas of
Thomas
Becket.
Becket
Yeah,
strategy.
yeah.
Who will get rid
Everyone
of this man?
everyone knows what it meant.
Yeah, yeah, it's the Thomas A. Becket, Richard Nixon strategy, right? Um, and yet, like, sorry, Richard II was a bad king. If he keeps doing
Oh
what he's
yeah.
doing, it's not going to be good for a lot of people. And if Henry Bolingbroke, who becomes Henry IV, doesn't take care of this, it's probably someone else will, and probably someone else less capable. But yet, he's haunted by it throughout this play. He's haunted by the crown. Even as he's dying, he puts the crown on the pillow next to him as this like horrible companion that's taking him to his grave with him. I mean, it's such a kind of balanced and appreciative play, right? This is what we talk about. You talk about this a lot, Pat, respecting your audience. This is a play that has profound respect for its audience.
Yeah. And I think there's something going on in all of these history plays. Like Shakespeare is sort of presenting a grand theory, a fundamentally conservative grand theory of monarchy. And yeah, and it starts with Richard, this idea that here is a king who is who is bad, and he was. This is one of the reason I love the a lot of the history plays. One of my favorite course that I ever took in all of college was my first semester freshman year, and I always say that was my mistake because I took the best college, my best course I was ever going to take was first semester freshman year, and they were never, none of them were matched up to it, and it was medieval England 1216 to 1485. So it starts with King John and it ends with Richard III. So it's basically all of the history plays, including all the build up. So you get all of what's going on and why they're doing it. And yeah, when we get to Richard, the argument was Richard II. He just didn't get how to be a king. He kind of, one of his biggest mistakes, which the play doesn't get into as much, is he wanted to essentially be a king without needing to talk to people. He was kind of, he just wanted to make his own decisions and give land to his friends. And he had a group of friends that he wanted to reward. And then he just angered everybody else and he didn't want them telling him what to do. Like he was a little petty, but he wasn't like bad. To his friends, he was a very good friend. And to everybody else, he just didn't want them telling him what to do. He would have made like he would have made a good duke or something. Like he would have made a good lesser ruler, but he couldn't do this. So he was constantly trying to rule without parliament, and he never had enough money. And his mistake was that when the Duke of Lancaster died, John of Gaunt, he tried to, and Henry Bolingbroke had technically been exiled during this period for 10 years. He tried to confiscate the lands of Lancaster. He tried to, and because Lancaster was basically the second largest landholder beside the king,
And Henry is John of Gaunt's
child. So he tries to basically usurp the rights of inheritance and take the land so that he can continue to rule without parliament. He basically wanted to just do his own thing without other people trying to tell him what to do. And that's not how you can be king. You can't do it. So he was just a bad king. And so when Henry comes back, Henry supposedly makes an oath before he called the Doncaster oath when he lands and says, I'm not coming back for the crown. I'm only coming back from my land. So a lot of people, and this becomes a sticking point it's referenced a little bit in Henry IV, part one, but it becomes a sticking point because he makes this claim and everyone says, okay, we believe you. And they follow him, whether he meant it then or not is a question, whether he broke his word later, but eventually he realized, wait, I can take the whole crown. And he does. And then eventually has Richard killed. So there's this idea here that this guy he was never a bad king. He just wasn't what people wanted him to be, and he wasn't very good. But so this becomes the whole debate. What do you do with a bad king? Do you overthrow them? That becomes the big problem. And then, because obviously then when Queen Elizabeth is coming along, she's the result of a relatively recent usurpation of Richard III. So how do you justify her grandfather's taking of the crown, but not any other one? And basically the answer becomes, well, the reason was because Richard II should not have been. They should have found a way to deal with the bad king. And because they did that, it led to all the other problems, which culminate in Richard III, essentially the devil on earth. And then they basically say that was why that one was justified because he was literally like a hellhound, like bred on earth.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason they were allowed to do it. Now we're done. You do it again, you're going to start another one of these cycles. Don't overthrow the monarchy, or you're going to have another one of these. That sort of becomes the problem. And all of these plays are dealing with that tension. How do we handle the fact that all of us owe our crown to the overthrow of a bad king, but not a bad man?
hmm Yeah, that is it. And we should also mention that Henry VII, who's Elizabeth's grandfather, who starts the Tudor line, his justification for the throne is that his great grandmother was Henry V's queen. So the one king out of all this cycle who we respect highly is, can you guess? Henry V. So that's
Yeah.
the link to the Tudors anyway. That's their justification for why
I
we
actually
should
had
rule.
never tracked that down all
Mhm.
the way. I didn't realize that's because I'm like Henry V is the one who gets almost a completely clean slate.
He does, and
Uh,
his wife
I
is
didn't realize that's
yeah.
how they actually were tracking it. I mean,
Mm.
I should have known that, but I never actually looked at it.
After he dies when he's about 35. Her second husband is Owen Tudor, who's like a lower nobility.
Oh, so it's through that line.
Yes, yeah,
Oh, I had no idea on that
yeah,
line.
yeah.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that's we like Henry V, and I think that making Hal a glorious character, it allows you to deal with the big problem that was around in Shakespeare's day when you did a history play or any play, which is they license them. So you have to get permission from the Master of the Revels to do a play. And the Lord Chamberlain was one of the people who did these licensings. They didn't care about lewdness. What they cared about was any kind of threat to
Politics.
monarchy. They
Yeah,
cared about
politics.
politics. And so you got plays licensed by doing things like not attacking the relatives of the queen. And there's actually a famous episode where someone who supposedly was attempting to rebel against Elizabeth
Love this story. Yeah,
ignited his rebellion by staging a production of Richard II, which when
paid
they
for it. He paid for it.
he
They
paid for
didn't. Yeah, he paid for a special day like production of Richard II. It's great.
and when the authorities heard that there was a production of a play igniting a rebellion, they just arrested him and killed him. And then that's when Elizabeth said, "Know ye, I am Richard II," which was her way of putting down that. So these things were dangerous. We should all, the having a history play in the time of Shakespeare actually was dangerous. You could get killed putting these things on, or you could spend a lot of work putting a play and it get rejected, right? Or you're fined, or you could get fined, or your production company could lose its right to put on plays. So the work here, the kind of delicate balance Shakespeare's dealing with, was not simply out of respect for the monarch. It was a survival tactic. But yeah, that's a really good point, Pat. All of these plays, the 8 plays of the Henriad, are really what do we do when we owe our current monarch to the fact that we killed a good man in order to improve things?
But I love that. I just love the undercurrent that sort of runs with these. And I know they're written in the other order, but I read them. I had never read a few of them. I read them for the podcast. I'm trying. It's always been a sort of goal of mine for a long time to read every Shakespeare play. So I'm hoping throughout the course of this podcast, if I can keep cranking, I can get through them all. So I got through all of the histories. And originally I was going to do like a tragedy, a comedy, a history, a tragedy, a comedy, history. And I realized I'm like, no, 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 no. You got to do the histories together. Like they actually, even though they're not written together, they really do feel like they form a sequence. And you can see, especially in the first 4 and then the last 4, they echo each other throughout. They have this really cool quality of like a Greek tragedy almost going on. But I hadn't read, for example, like Henry IV Part 2. I'd never read it, and I never read any of the Henry VI. So reading them all now, especially the reading the Henry VI and how they work with Richard III, when we get to the Richard III episode, that'll be fun to talk about. But even this, just reading Henry IV Part 2 and sort of reading them all in sequence and realizing how they inform Henry V, or just realizing how they really all string together, they become far more interesting when you
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I would recommend that. Henry the Fourth.
You have to suffer through Henry VI Part 1, but that's okay.
Yeah, the Henry the Sixths aren't the best. Henry the Sixth Part One is pretty bad. I would say Henry the Fourth Part Two.
It's not great either.
It's not great. It's got lovely Falstaff scenes. It seems like the excuse of the play was more Falstaff. He was immensely popular, and there's an epilogue in which Shakespeare promises to give us more Falstaff, and then he kills him off before he can, which prompted a lot of anger. So he brought Falstaff back for Merry Wives of Windsor because everybody got pissed that he promised them more Falstaff and he didn't give it to them. So
Can you imagine going to Henry V, expecting to see Falstaff following him to France, and then being like, "You killed him in the first like 2 scenes"? It
what
must
are
have been.
you doing? Well, I mean, he's not even in the play. They just talk about
No,
his funeral.
they just
Yeah.
talk about him being dead.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of, I mean, I like Henry V, but that is immensely disappointing. But anyway,
Somehow Falstaff died. It's the opposite of the Palpatine thing. Somehow
yeah,
Falstaff died.
Yeah.
Oh, why?
Yeah, which they do cover in this. You get that scene
Yes.
in this play, which in Chimes at Midnight, rather, not in this play, in Chimes at Midnight, which works a lot better. It works a lot better as an epilogue as opposed to an opening to a
I
play.
especially liked what they did because we can actually talk about the movie because we should get into the movie itself. But one thing I want to mention, what I really, while we're on this topic, what I really like, one of the things they did is in Henry V, there's a scene and it plays more of a part in the scene that follows because there's a whole betrayal thing. But there's this scene where they come to him and Henry V says, we want the man who attacked our person yesterday, we let him go. We figure he was just drunk. And it's a totally throwaway scene in Henry V. And here they actually make it because they make it Falstaff and let him go. And I thought that's such a good scene. It really imbues that scene. Like I wish that was like what was really going on in Henry V, that he had been talking about Falstaff. That would have made that scene so good. And it makes it really good in Chimes of Midnight. I like how in Chimes of Midnight he actually does weave in a little bit of Henry V at the end and actually tie it to Falstaff's death. It really adds a nice character to it. But
Yeah, yeah. Chimes at Midnight is a wonderful bit of editing, and
yeah,
this isn't Orson Welles had initially in 1938 did a play called Five Kings where he tried to edit all of the Henrys into one 4 hour play, all eight of them, and apparently it was a disaster. They did a rotating stage a la Bertolt Brecht, which kept breaking. So you can
it's not
imagine.
his fault.
Yeah, but apparently it just wasn't that good. And then he did this in 1960 in Ireland, and it closed. It got lashed by the critics. And I think his observation was he just didn't edit the two plays together very well, and so I think he took another shot at it for the film. Which I love the fact that he got producers on board by telling them he was making Treasure Island, which I think he shot the first scene too, like a boat scene, and was just like, "Yep, we're really making Treasure Island. See, look at that boat. It's really Treasure Island." But the movie is gorgeous, and he's a really good
He's a
Falstaff.
very good Falstaff. Yeah,
Yeah, he's not a jester character. And I think that's the difference. He's not
no,
like Shakespeare's fool characters are smart. Think of the fool from Lear. He's clearly a very politically savvy character. But Falstaff isn't that. Falstaff is vitality. He is just everything that is fun and life. And what's so kind of sad in Henry IV Part Two is you start to see him observe his age. And what Orson Welles does so well in Adaptation Choice is the deterioration of the king, of King Henry IV, his insomnia, he's dying, he's looking for his king, is kind of intercut with Falstaff's observation of his own age and things like that. And that's even put a pin in or highlighted by opening up this movie, Chimes at Midnight, with Act Three of Henry IV Part Two, which is the Chimes at Midnight conversation, where it's him and Master Shallow,
I
Law.
love Master
Yeah,
Shallow. I love the actor. We have seen the child. I think his voice is great. I don't
yeah,
know. I find it really cool.
and it's a fun character too, because he's
Oh
just
yeah.
one of these like prick lawyers who who's like trying to use the system or whatever. But there's actually honest companionship between him and Falstaff as well.
Especially when they're drunk.
Mm.
And like he keeps missing the chair. And like it's
Yeah.
actually really I think
Oh
that's
yeah, and he's like talking about being young, and Falstaff's like every third word is a lie.
yeah, every why is it the vice of old men is the lie? Yeah, and it just has him watching. But it's like even Falstaff's like, Hal's not around. Guess I'll go see Shallow and go get drunk with him
Yeah.
instead. He
Mhm.
just wanders off to the countryside to go see this random dude and get tanked with him. It's that's totally believable.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
absolutely, anybody would do that nowadays.
Yeah.
Like, he's not around. Yeah, I'll go to the pub and meet up with my other buddies. Like, it's a great scene. They seem to have a lot of fun together.
Yeah. Yeah. But Falstaff also has really good observations about, growing old and those types of things. And it's highlighted by, he's juxtaposed. It's interesting. I would not think of him reading the play Falstaff as being juxtaposed against Henry IV, but
No, I don't think that's. I
obviously,
don't know if that is in the play. I mean,
yeah.
probably it's there, but it's
Mm-hmm.
probably there.
Mm-hmm.
But I never noticed it.
Yeah, and that seems to be Orson Welles' almost his thesis. So he said of the theater production anyway, that his idea was that it's a love story, a father and son love story, but there's two fathers. There's Henry who Hal Henry IV, who Hal can embrace entirely, because first of all he's just a cold man, and I love how they do that with like you could see their breath whenever they're in the
Yeah,
castle. It's just freezing in there for some reason. Um, you could see his, but also he's got blood on his hands. You know that there's something corrupt there. And then there's Falstaff, who's sort of like a father figure too, but he can't keep being a father figure because he doesn't allow anyone to kind of grow up, right? You know, you just keep getting drunk and keep hanging out and you keep being a kid with Falstaff. There's sort of that youthful vitality about him, which is undercut by the irony of Falstaff is just getting older and he's getting more dead and he's becoming more decrepit and he's intensely aware of his mortality. And so this kind of impossible situation that Hal's in, where he has to like select a path to go forward in, but neither path really works particularly well. So he has to I guess take over France is the solution. But whatever. Like that's the conflict of this movie and these plays, and it's wonderful. Those scenes in the Boar's Head Tavern are immensely fun to watch. Them just running around from bed to bed, and someone picked my pocket. I love that scene.
someone picks. Yeah, it comes right
Because
down.
the joke is that like somebody actually picked his pocket, but he's lying because he wants to be reimbursed. He wants money that he doesn't have in a gold ring that, actually isn't a gold ring.
It's a brass ring. Yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't realize somebody actually picked his pocket and was like, there's nothing in here but a bill. There's just a bill in his pocket. And so that scene is just really, really funny. How indignant he is. Wells's Falstaff is indignant. I love that little bit of business there to introduce him, because that's how we meet him, right? When we first meet him in the
Yeah.
action of the play, not in the prologue. Yeah, it's a great Falstaff, and I just love how they went all in on the fat. Like you see a lot of
Yeah.
Falstaffs who are kind of chubby to not even that chubby. Like in the Hollow Crown, the Falstaff looks kind of normal. Maybe he was fat by Renaissance standards, but he looks.
I don't know. I've seen the armor of Henry VIII. It's pretty.
It's,
They had to let that out a bit. You ever seen it? It's great. He
I
just has
haven't. No.
like, oh yeah, he had a serious beer belly. So they just it's just like it looks like a normal suit of armor, and then there's just this bulge like right in his. So Henry VIII, he put on
Put
some
in some
pounds
pounds
there.
too. Yeah.
So I'm guessing they had some portly men, but
Yeah.
he obviously can't tell, don't know exactly what their size was, but I feel like there's some pretty funny ones of that. But I mean, you're right. Even the great sequence of him on the battlefield with his armor. I mean, that armor is just great. I mean, he looks like that's one of those sequences where I was like, I wanted to show my son it until it got super violent. But at the end. But I wanted to show him it at least because I thought he will laugh. Like that's the thing is like it's like that's like a childishly joke of just how big and fat he is in his armor.
Mhm.
And I was like, even my 6-year-old son will laugh at that. I don't have to tell him anything, and he will immediately get that you're supposed to laugh at that because it's funny, and it's just a great sequence of watching him like hide behind the tree and waddle out. Like
Hmm.
they make him enormous and very effectively enormous. I think it's a great bit of costuming.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, Wells is in a fat suit for this. Apparently, he wasn't that fat, at least not yet. But
It
and
reminds me of like there's a great sequence supposedly in I've heard this that there was some story when he was in Touch of Evil. It was the same thing. Like he was fat, but he wasn't that fat. And so in Touch of Evil, they'd also put him in a fat suit. And he was enormous if you've ever seen Touch of Evil. And apparently he went out. It took him forever to get him in the suit, and they were filming like one scene during the day, and they had to film another one at night. So he was like, "I'm not going to take the suit off." So he went out to dinner and was like out eating, and one of his friends came up and was like, "Orson, it's so good to see you. You look so well." And he's like, "I look like I gained 200 pounds." Like What are you talking about? I look well,
Uh,
apparently. So, but he maybe because he has some experience with it, but he plays fat very well.
yeah, they love it, and there's so much humor about Falstaff's size that it's just go in on the comedy.
But
There's
it never
nothing
gets old.
subtle
Like
about this, and
there's
yeah, that's
nothing
true.
old. Like you're not sitting there being like, stop mocking that guy. Like that can
Mm.
happen. Like I feel like a lot. I don't know what is that. What was that movie with Gwyneth Paltrow and what's his
Oh,
name?
Shallow Hal with
Shallow
Jack
Hal.
Black.
I'm like the guy from the King Kong movie. Yeah, Jack Black. But I mean that, just like there's only so many fat jokes we can make. But this, like, now he can make more. He's just because they're clever and they're funny, and you just kind of are like, man, he is a whale of a man. Like even my favorite is when he dies, when they think he's dead. When Hal comes across him and thinks he's dead, he goes, was there not enough flesh to keep some life in you? He can't even stop from making a fat joke over he thinks a corpse. I love
Mhm.
that. Was
But
there not enough was there not enough flesh to keep
yeah,
some life in you?
because I think it's part of love too. When they're making fun of him, they're not dismissing him. I think that's the
No,
thing with like Shallow Hal, the plot of Shallow Hal. An audience, I don't know if you've seen this movie. I don't know if I've seen this movie. I
I
just
haven't
feel
seen it
like
either. I haven't seen it either, but I've seen it. Like, there's no
I
way.
think I've seen it, but it's just so forgettable that maybe I didn't see the whole thing. But the whole idea with Shallow Hal is like he only sees the inner beauty of women. For there's a curse or something, it doesn't matter, and so he romances this very large woman who apparently has a good heart because she looks like a young Gwyneth Paltrow, which some people find attractive, and so the whole thing is just jokes about like she jumps in a pool and you see Gwyneth Paltrow jump in a pool, and then like all the water in the pool leaves the pool because it's actually a very heavy set woman who's and eureka moment or whatever. And it's just that you're just mocking this woman for being fat. Like that's the whole thing. In
Where he like
this,
takes her under. Like I think I've seen pieces of it when it's on like cable TV, and he like takes out her underwear and is like, "What is this?" I'm like,
it's really big. Her panties are
okay,
large. Oh my God.
whoa, like yeah. But then that's not the jokes here.
Yeah, because here it's part of his vitality. Like him being big, it's what we appreciate about him. It's necessary to what makes him lovable. It's not a fault in him, even though, gluttony is a fault, and the play acknowledges that, and that's why Prince Hal can't become a Falstaff. He can't stay with Falstaff because if you're going to be king, you can't be Falstaff. We love Falstaff. We need Falstaffs in our world. They can't rule us, right? They can't be our dad. We need better fathers. But Falstaff is, he's just got so much more life, which is obviously the symbol there is his just girth. He's also smarter than everyone. He is very, very bright. He makes smart observations. He knows how to get away with things. And I think as Orson Welles plays him, when Hal needs to leave him, he gets it. That's a lovely moment when he goes to Hal and says, do you know me? And Hal's like, I do not know you, old man.
I don't
And
know if I buy that, and I don't know if I buy that interpretation of the ending, but
oh, really? How do you buy it?
well, because he says right afterwards when he says because when they're leaving and he's talking to Shallow and he says he has to say that. He has to say that now. He has to say it, but he's going to call for me. He's going to call for me later. He'll call for me later. And then he wanders off. I think that's at the end of Henry IV part 2 as well. I don't think he buys it. I think he's absolutely crushed.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think he's sitting there being like, ah, the swallow has flown from the nest. I think he's absolutely fundamentally devastated.
Hmm.
And that's why he's in total denial. He's saying
Hmm.
he's gonna call me. He's gonna call for me later and I'll go.
Hmm.
That's what he thinks. I don't believe that.
Yeah, that he's okay.
I
Fair
don't believe
enough.
that he's I don't believe that he lets him go. I think he's absolutely crushed. I think that's the tragedy. That's the
Yeah.
tragedy of Falstaff. And in this play, this is so when we were, I mentioned it earlier, I was like, I think you can have a discussion. Like, there's this, I look at it, I think even in the movie, and I don't think this is necessarily in the play, and I think this is in the movie, that there's this sense that this is like there's something dark about it. Because there's this sense that Hal sort of knows what he's doing. And this is in Henry V. He says it all the time in Henry V. I made use of my time. I learned from that time. And I learned from it how to be prudent and how to be a good king. And I'm not like my father, who was cold and didn't know how to be a good king. He was just he made it through. I will be a good king because I learned from that time of my reckless youth. And now I have left it behind, but I learned from it. And there's this sense that he's getting something out of it because he's a king, and kings can sort of go into this sort of lower world and come back out again with knowledge. But there's this sense that someone like Falstaff, if Falstaff never meets if he never meets Hal, Falstaff could continue to have been Falstaff. He would have continued to have been what he was. But because he meets Hal, it's like a moth going to the flames. This character has no chance now. He will burn out because of his experience with Hal, and that's sort of like the tragedy of it. That he's this character who gets destroyed by his associations with this great royal figure. If he never meets him, Falstaff continues to be girthy and mirthy and all this stuff. But because Hal gets his use out of him and then tosses him aside. And there's this sense, I don't think this is in the play, but I think that that's in the film. I think it's in Chimes of Midnight, which is fascinating what directors can do. You can take the exact same play, chop it up, put some color on it, and obviously I'm simplifying it, but and make a different thing. I think that's what's going on in the play. This is Falstaff's tragedy. This is Falstaff's the great comic character becoming tragic because he interacts with royalty.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's so it's definitely true that Hal is sort of plotting from the beginning, which is in both the play and in
Yeah.
Chimes, because he has that speech about how
I
I
don't know
will
if
be
he's
like it's
it's not
not
good.
plotting, but he
It's
says
not
like
plotting. It is in the Chimes of Midnight. It's not in the play. It's reassuring the audience. It's do not worry. I know who I am. I will emerge. Don't. And I mean, in some ways, it's sort of just otherwise the audience will feel totally cheated. This is sort of like, bad foreshadowing to some extent, because otherwise the audience is just going to be like, wait, now he doesn't, now he's going to be good. Like, where did that come from? That was never suggested before. So this is sort of you kind of have to plant it a little bit. It's in the play that it's sort of he's just saying it, I think. But in the movie, he's plotting. In the movie, it really feels like he's plotting.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if is Falstaff made worse off by his association with Hal. Does
Yes.
Hal burn him out?
Yes.
How does Hal burn him out though?
Because he dies right after Hal kicks him away. Like maybe I mean you're right. Maybe is the implication that it's just his age in general? I don't,
Mhm.
but I mean, I guess let's put it this way. If Hal's not there and Falstaff just ages naturally, like obviously you're right, the second half of that play, I hadn't really picked up it in the play as much, but the movie, the aspect of the aging, this aging Falstaff. And so his death could be just natural, but he doesn't die in despair of having been rejected. I don't buy it as I mean maybe if you go with your interpretation that he lets Hal go, I don't think he does. I think he dies in despair
Mhm.
because he has lost his, and that's what Henry V says.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's despairing at the end that he's lost everything. I think that's true. I think there's something in Wells's performance where he can appreciate. He seems to be appreciating what Hal has become, even though, as you're saying, like he'll call for me, he'll call for me. Yeah, that indicates that he's not accepting it, even if he can appreciate the transformation. Um, I think there is something. I think why this isn't a tragedy of Falstaff is that the tragedy implies there was something that the character did that makes them, and you said this before, something the
No,
character
no,
did
I
that
would,
makes them
yeah.
responsible for their death in some
Yes,
way.
it's not a tragedy in that sense. You're right.
No,
That
I
is
think
true.
it's the tragedy of, it's sort of like the tragedy that Jaques observes, which is just we all do this. We all go and we all die. Because if that's the case, especially in the film, then
That's true.
it's the inevitable tragedy of both Henry IV and Falstaff. both of them go through their own kind of recognition and acceptance and kind of harsh acceptance of mortality that is filtered through their own personal experience. I think Falstaff has a far more intelligent grasp of it than Henry IV, in part because Henry IV is
Yeah.
so consumed with this thing he
Guilt.
has to
Yeah, this
deal with, guilt, and
guilt and responsibility.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, he can't actually.
Falstaff has no responsibility and no guilt.
No, no. So therefore, he's almost a better philosopher for that reason. He can see the world for what it is because he's distant from the political. And Henry V, I guess maybe why he becomes such a great king, despite the fact that everybody else in this period sucks, is that he's partially fed by political responsibility, but he's also fed by Falstaff. He's fed by probably the greatest thinker he'll come across, even though that thought is filtered through this kind of bacchanalian vitality. Um, and that's why Henry V can be so much better. And as you're saying, Pat, in the film, that kind of comes off as mercenary, right? I'm going to use what I need and then come out from behind the cloud and become take France. I'm going to take France and everybody will love me for it. But it also has this sort of statement about, I guess, about kind of political power, which is, you sort of need these two streams. You need the sort of rational, and maybe not just political power, but just being a human. You need the kind of vitalistic,
It's about being
Dionysic
human, but kings, you're right. It's about being a human, and kings need it in
need to
abundance.
be human.
There's
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
idea that yeah, your average, because this is a class-based society. So your peasant needs this, but they don't need it as much. Your kings need both of these in absolute abundance because kings aren't humans. They're as close to God as you will get to a human on earth in, other than Christ. Like that's what they always say. They're like, I think God and like every single thing. So it's like other than Christ, this is the closest God will get to humanity. And so the king must have all of humanity in abundance. He
Mhm.
cannot have just one. He has to have it all.
Yeah.
And that's what makes you a great king. And then it trickles down. All human beings need you cannot, to have the Dionysus or Apollo. You
Hmm.
can't have one or the other. You have to have both. If a peasant has too much of one or the other in even light amounts, it'll destroy them. A king can tip it more, but he's got to still keep it. That's almost the sense of what's going on.
Yeah, that's what I think is definitely going on in this. I think it's going on in the original plays as
It's in
well.
the original play. No,
Yeah, I
I
think
think that
so.
is in the play, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
I
I,
just
I
don't think I don't think it's as mercenary. Like there is this
mhm,
sense, and it's not quite as mercenary. Like I do think Hal is enjoying his time.
mhm.
He's not on a field trip. But there is the sense that he's aware that he will leave this. Falstaff is not aware that he won't leave this. Hal is aware that he will leave. He will go and be king. Falstaff is not aware that he will not go with him. That's the difference.
Mhm. But
That Hal has that awareness. Falstaff doesn't.
maybe Falstaff does have an acute awareness of his own mortality.
Yes.
Falstaff does have that. So, well, maybe he doesn't. He sees Hal as, oh, great. Um, I am going to be justice itself. When Hal is king, I'm going to be justice itself. I'm going to be good to my friends and bad to my enemies. I'm going to have so much money. So yeah, he does have this fantasy of importance that doesn't exist. But I think, and the film highlights this, he also has a much better sense of, or much humbler sense of a person's role in the world. And
Yeah.
it's odd that and maybe the tragedy or the sadness of it is that when it comes to him in that point, he misses it and it's crushing. It's crushing that he realizes, oh yeah, I'm not gonna really matter to this person anymore. Um, yeah, and it's really devastating. The movie is really devastating.
It's really sad.
It's a really sad
It's a
movie.
really hard scene to watch.
Yeah, yeah, and Orson Welles is part of it is he's just so
He's very
good
good.
throughout the entire
One of his
film.
best performances. I really think it is.
Oh yeah, I think it's got Citizen Kane beat by a mile.
Yeah, Citizen Kate's fine, but it's not like this.
Yeah,
This is his best
mhm.
performance. I can't think of. I mean, I like Touch of Evil. It's fun, but it's not. It's not this.
Yeah, this is incredibly rich. This movie is where if it didn't have anything else going for it, it would be worth it for Wells. I like Keith Baxter in it as Hal.
Yeah,
Um,
he's good.
yeah, he's good. I like how the story was he was a dishwasher and they told him there's auditions going on. They're just open calls for Shakespeare, and so he auditioned for Orson Welles and Welles cast him on the spot. So
Yeah, I mean he's pretty
he's good.
pretty good.
And
I really,
Gilgood
and
is
again, I
the
really like the scene, like to your point, like the scene when they have their mock trial. I really like that scene in the play
yes,
in
yeah, yeah.
general.
Mhm.
And this, it's just fun. Like all the people watching, and and they're all being like, it's like he's in a play. There's like the old
Mhm.
lady, I like her.
Mhm.
Um, but it just the whole sequence just feels like exactly what a bunch of drunken buddies do.
Mhm.
It's weird, and I know like everyone like the past is a different, like it's all the same, and we're all like usually it's all BS. Like,
Mhm.
they were totally different and they didn't have that much in common with us. But think certain things you just see like this and you go, man, they totally were. Like that's
Mhm.
I did things like that when I was in college, and I don't think it was just because we did theater. I think people do stuff like that. They do. And it's really fun to see it. It's really just a great sequence. And in the movie really makes it seem like it's really fun. And obviously the devastating line is you know, don't banish all the world, but don't banish
Yeah,
Jack Falstaff.
yeah,
And it's just like, man, the I do, I will. Like,
yeah,
oh
yeah.
my
That's as he's
gosh.
leaving, right? As he's
Yeah.
walking out of the
I
castle. Yeah.
do. I will. No, it's when that's later. It's when they're doing it in the drunken tavern. Is the banish all the world, but don't banish Jack Falstaff. And then he says when the guy comes in and he says, "I do, I will," and then they take him away.
Yeah.
But I mean, then it's devastating. Even right there, you know it's going to happen, and and you can see even Falstaff sees it. He knows he doesn't. He knows it's no longer a
You're not joking
play.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, he's telling him, and you're like, man, it's brutal. It's really hard to watch. And then obviously when you see it at the end of the movie, it is really hard because Falstaff is just fun. I always use him as he is so much mirth and he's so much wit. He causes it in other people.
Hmm.
Like he can't express it all himself, so others start to express it because he just spreads mirth and wit, and others who would be not very funny are really funny around him. It's a really cool thing to see that character. It's really really fun. I don't think there's anything else like it in
Hmm.
terms of just what the character of Falstaff does. And
Hmm.
it's so sad to see him just destroyed at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. One thesis that, or guiding principle that Wells had for the film, and I think this may go into to Falstaff's role in it, is that it's the death of merry old England. The sort of England that was peaceful and idyllic, and we kind of fantasize about, that this is the period in time where that stops. And the argument for this, or the not the argument, but the way we see this dramatized is in the battle scene, right? With the battle scene, which
Yeah,
is, I think, a wonderful battle scene. That's a great
yeah, it's great.
bit
And I
there.
think when we do Henry V, you can see that I think Branagh's pulling a lot from it,
Mhm.
pieces from it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Falstaff factors into this because so in the movie you have a battle scene which is pretty extensive, and by the end of it, it's just people covered in mud punching each other. Like they end up
Yeah.
falling into the mud, and they're just, and you don't
Yeah, it's
know
grand.
who's.
Yeah, it's grand at the beginning. All the
It's.
knights and
Mhm,
their lances and the banners and the music and the trumpets and they're riding across. It's grand. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's war.
mhm,
It's just this sort of it's like a tournament. And
mhm.
then yeah, to your point. And then at the end,
Yeah, they look like the ogres from the second Lord of the Rings from the Two Towers when they're pulling them out of the mud. That's what they look like by
ogres? Oh, good
ogres. What
lord.
are they?
Orcs,
Orcs.
bro.
I'm sorry,
Orcs.
orcs.
Good
Um,
good
oh
gracious.
God, I've offended our audience. Yeah, they look like those. They'd be.
And me.
Oh, yes, I think I'm doing the show by myself from here on out. But or Pat's doing the show by himself. But yeah, that's a lovely sequence because it ends just in everybody is indistinguishable and
Yeah.
just covered in mud and it's it's gross. And the sequence starts with, of course, as it does in the battle does in the play, with Falstaff's all stuff on honor. That why would I go and earn honor? Honor means nothing. Honor is air. It's just what is honor? It's air. It's a word that it's just a word. It has no meaning. Whoever has it, he who has it, he that died a Wednesday, right? It's nothing. And that's a very kind of, I think, modernist approach to the
It's a
play.
very, I mean, that's the, the All Quiet on the Western Front. We did
Mhm.
that. That's
Yeah,
exactly what that is. What is the point of this? No one
yeah.
earned anything. Why are we,
Mhm.
honor is nothing.
Yeah. And while that's, I don't think honor is nothing is the position Shakespeare takes,
No.
because you have to read Henry V to know that he doesn't take that position. It's the position it's not that he is rejecting that as well, he's presenting that. I think Wells is leaning on that a lot more. Because I think Wells is arguing in a sense that this is the point when the sort of idyllic ends. And Falstaff is sort of part of that idyllic world, that fun world. And once we go into battle, now it's over. And that's really when Hal becomes the prince who's going to lead England. It's because that's where he kills Hotspur. And that's also the scene at the end of that battle sequence. That's where Henry IV sees Falstaff for I think the only time in the movie, right? Where Hal actually stands literally between his two father figures and, and has to
Yeah.
pick one. And I think that's what Wells is doing in this movie. I think Wells is saying that Falstaff's mortality is part of a way of life that's going away. And that battle sequence is that pivot. It's about at the halfway point of the movie, maybe a little later than the halfway point, in which we're now leaving that idyllic world and we're going into something that's going to create our own world. And less
It's
it's
less
less
fun.
pleasurable,
It's
yeah,
less
than
fun.
mm,
It is just less fun. Second half of the movie is it does drag a little, I gotta say. And there's like a 20-minute period where I'm like,
mhm.
dragging a little. But and I agree. It's just less fun. There's just not as much entertainment. Although they do have some great sequences, like when they're hiding above the bed and like Falstaff can't get it, and Falstaff can't get it up down below.
Yeah.
What is it? It's like when age cannot when perform when what is it about age when performance cannot meet desire or something like that? It's
Mm,
some line like that. Where it's like,
yeah.
eh. But
Mhm.
there is just a that scene is kind of funny.
Yeah, that's I
But
also like
but
the
it doesn't have the same humor as the rest of it. It feels less funny.
there's even fewer people. Like that house
Yep.
just isn't as filled. It's just fewer people. Though I love the line when he's like, "Oh, I was only saying bad things about you to keep you away from bad women."
Yeah. Yeah. No,
It's
yeah, I was
great.
telling you, yeah. When he goes, "Oh, so you were going to say you knew we were here the whole time?" Because that's the
Mm,
previous lie.
mm.
No, no, it's the bad people wouldn't think you were going to keep away from him. Like he's just so good. He can't. He's not.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not going to use the same lie twice. That wouldn't be fun.
Yeah.
Like I'm lying. We all know I'm lying, but I'm not going to use the same lie. That's not fun. Like
Yeah.
this
Mm.
is why he's such a great character.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can believe that. There's this.
Mm.
I mean, that's been a sort of a theme of English literature. I wouldn't even say
Mm.
British literature because it's not British, it's English particularly. It's the
Mm.
theme of English literature. Going back to we were talking about this play earlier, like Jerusalem. This is the play this is the 20th century play, but I love Jerusalem. And there's that's the same idea that he's going with. He's going with a Falstaffian figure. That's what that
Mm.
guy is. He's Falstaffian and he's
Rooster, right, is the name of the character?
Rooster, yeah, Rooster Cogburn. Is it Cogburn? Byron Root because he's named after Byron.
Mhm.
Um, but it's the same sort of idea. This idea of this is a way of England that's dying. Here is this Falstaffian figure living in the woods, sort of serving as a father figure to a bunch of, surrogate father figure to a bunch of these sort of surrogate, for surrogate orphans. That's not the right word. Whatever. Metaphorical orphans, whatever you want to go
Mhm.
with.
Yeah,
But
sure.
he's serving as a father figure to them all, and then they all kind of leave him, but his world is going to come crashing down. It's a very similar idea. It's a theme of English of this type of English literature. So I can see it. I don't that's certainly not in the original Henry,
No, 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 I don't
but
think so either.
that's certainly in Chimes of Midnight, which again I love. This is why when we do the adaptations, and we do a podcast on adaptations, this is a really, really good example of an adaptation. It's essentially the same text, and yet what he can do with the same text by sort of splicing it a little bit and removing some stuff and changing the tone and the scenery and the acting, like it's just a play that says something different to a different time, and it totally works.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful, beautiful adaptation. It's
Yeah,
one of the best movies I think has ever been made.
yeah. No, I agree. I think this is in my top 50 films.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I would put it in top 50, yeah.
Yeah, easily. Um, I think John Gielgud is another one who's great. It's John Gielgud was a big deal in the 30s, and it's lovely.
Is John Gielgud the Shallow?
No, he's
Is
Henry
he
IV.
Oh, Henry the Fourth. Oh, he's good too, yeah.
Yeah, I like Shallow too, but yeah, the John Gielgud is
Yeah, he's very good.
he's
He's very good.
really he's very good. He knows how to use the texts really, really well.
Yeah, he's a
Um,
very good, I don't know if he's trained Shakespearean actor, but he does it well.
yeah, he was sort of, I think he's a little younger than Olivier, but he's coming up around the same time as Olivier, and they work together a lot. Um, but yeah, yeah, he's wonderful. I will say one thing I struggled with in the movie was the Hotspur.
Yeah,
I
he's not great.
He's not great, and part of it is Wells's choice with him. Hotspur in the play is clearly a foil to Henry. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the most obvious thing in the world, right? I'm not giving you a deep criticism here. He's brave. He's valiant. He is fighting for what he thinks is right. The king, even at one point, which is in the adaptation, says, "If only they had switched Henry's so that he would be mine," that type of thing. Because he has all this.
Well, he's a foil, but he's a foil on the surface. I guess that's the
Yeah,
and
that's the.
that's the thing is that he's actually rash and brash and somewhat foolish and dismissive. And
He
if
would be a
he were
bad king.
king, he'd
It
be
would be
an
bad.
awful king. He'd be an awful king. And I think that's just the point is that maybe if he had met Falstaff and spent some time with Falstaff, he actually could be a good king. Like if he just learned to have a little fun and think about things a little more, he might actually be a good king. I don't know if that's part of the point.
I think so. I think that Hotspur would be. I agree with you. I think Hotspur would be a terrible king, but I don't think Hotspur is a terrible man, and I don't think
No.
Hotspur has an
Well, this is the same thing as
unjust
Richard.
reason. Yeah,
Richard II is not a good king, but he's not a bad man.
yeah,
Hotspur is not a good king, but he's not a bad man.
yeah. And I think
You know,
Hotspur's argument is right. His art, like
yes,
Edmund Mortimer, is unjustly unransomed at that beginning of the play, right? Hotspur has
yes,
absolute justification to go get his brother-in-law back, and the reason why Henry isn't doing it is because that's a threat to his power. Now, if Hotspur was a little more thoughtful, he'd realize, yeah, if it's a threat to his power, it's a threat to the realm I live in. So
this is a yeah.
maybe
I
I
should
should
yeah.
put my own personal needs aside a second, or my familial ties aside, and just let it go. But he doesn't. He embraces rebellion. However, we like Hotspur.
Yeah.
I think he is a noble person. I think he even has a kind of poetic thing. He can appreciate bravery, and I think he sort of um, inspires how to recognize valor. Hal recognizes the valor in Hotspur, and Hotspur's dying speech is lovely. It's a lovely
Yeah.
little speech, and when Hal completes it,
Yeah, you have robbed me of my youth
mhm,
is a that's pretty bad,
yeah,
pretty tough line.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And Hal appreciates it absolutely. I mean, it's a lovely thing. And with Wells, he makes Hotspur like when we see Hotspur on his own in the one romance
It's
scene.
like weird bath scene and
Yeah,
like
like he's trying to get dressed and his wife is helping him and everybody's playing the trumpet. They have like 700 trumpeters all around for
yeah,
some reason.
you know what I hadn't thought of this before, but it was like when I watched it this time, it reminds me of like literally from the bath to everything else, it reminds me of the Beast getting ready to go dance with Belle when they're like yeah, like the last petal is falling, and he's like standing up in his bath, and they're wrapping him up, and they're like trimming his whiskers, and they're setting him off. Like, why does he feel like the Beast? Like, this
Yeah.
isn't the right
Oh,
tone.
and
It
he's
feels like a Disney movie,
yeah,
right?
I
It feels like a
know
Disney,
it's completely off.
except for the nude butt.
Yeah,
It
which
feels like
is
a Disney movie.
also which is also wrong, right? I mean, so undignified to show his like pants fall down as people are coming to visit him.
Yeah,
I mean, you're making him into a clown, and that ruins everything, right? That makes him easy to kill. It makes him
and
easy to kill, and I think it
maybe
under.
that's the point. I don't know.
But then
Maybe
why
they
keep
didn't
the lines about like you have robbed me of my youth? Why keep that speech if you're going to turn him into a clown? Because it
because
completely undercuts.
you don't want to blow all your tragic,
Mhm,
you don't want to get it all out now. You need to save some. So if you make
mhm,
it all about Hotspur, like, because he does get some really good tragic lines. You don't want
mhm,
it now, but you want to set the tone. He's
mhm.
building a tone. I mean, I don't think it's a good choice,
Yeah.
but this is the only reason why I think you do it,
Mhm,
is that he doesn't want to make it the tragedy of Hotspur, and
mhm,
then you just kind of watch it. Like, you want it to be you want this to be a character we respect, but
mhm,
one we can just kind of kick out relatively easily,
mhm,
because he's in this movie, he serves as a device for the development of Hal
mhm.
and for Falstaff, because then Falstaff lies and says he killed him and steals the body. It's so great.
Mhm.
I love it. You can just see the rage. Like, there's the absolute rage in Hal when he realizes he's doing this. And you can just see the king is like, you're clearly lying. The king just knows it and is like, I am not getting involved in your spat. Like, that's pretty much what it is. The king is just like, I'm walking away because I know you're lying. But Hal is so mad. It's a great little sequence. So it's a plot device. So I that's the only reason I think you do it, is because you need to, if you don't have that, and you do instead him being martial and brave, and you do this whole thing, you build him up too much to then kill him, as because he's only a plot device in this. He's not the end of the play. In the play, it's 5 acts. You have to build him up. He has to be massive. He's the triumphal defeat at the end of Act 5. In this, he's 50% of the way through the movie. Well, I guess we said it's probably a little over 50% of the battle. You can't have him be too big. So the choice was cut him down so he can serve what he needs to serve. And then he still gets his tragic lines. You're not going to totally undercut him. But I think that's what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean that's fine and all, but when you see his butt, he's a clown.
He's too Disney. He's
Yeah,
very
it's
bad.
it's too
He's
it's
Disney.
too clownish. So
Yeah.
if you're gonna cut
They
down that
undercut
scene,
him. He did it too much.
yeah,
He's now
and
dismissible. You don't really think about him that much. He
yeah,
should have more weight.
and what you could do with that
Not
scene
like
is
Falstaff weight, but bump. No.
yes, thank you. Snare drums in the shop. But I think like somebody made this point. It's the one romance scene in the play. It's at least not between men. Is the Hotspur's scene with his wife? In that you can make that an honest scene where she's talking to him and just have them have an honest romance. It's different enough from everything else that's going on. It's one scene, so it's not going to rob the rob attention from the trajectory of Falstaff and Hal. But that was the only frustration I had with it. I think everything else is pretty wonderful.
It's a really, really, really good movie.
Yeah,
It's just a
it's
very,
a
very good movie. I could watch it again. Like, I would watch it
mhm,
again and be like, "Well, I'll pick up more stuff." It's one of
yeah,
those movies.
hmm
Like, you watch it again, and I could watch it again, and I'll pick up more stuff. And
hmm
it's a really deep movie. It's a really, really good adaptation,
hmm yeah,
especially if part Henry the Fourth Part Two, which isn't that great.
no,
It's a really, really. It's just a great movie.
hmm yeah, yeah. I would watch this. Henry IV Part Two is surprisingly difficult to read. Um,
It's just not.
no, there's no
Just
real conflict.
nothing happens. Like, there's literally nothing happens. It's not very
Basically,
good.
the like Hotspur's father becomes the new Hotspur, but he's older and lazier and kind of
And then there's
sick.
like other. Then they have to go to like
The
Wales at one
Archbishop, they have to get, well,
point,
they,
and
yeah, Glendower was mentioned in the first one.
yeah,
Then they
but
have to get the Archbishop, and then they just trick them into surrendering.
which is like they just trick them, and then they go, "All right, now that you've sent away your armies and we've all agreed to peace, you'll all be executed." I'm like, "What? People are terrible."
Yeah,
It's
this is,
bad. Yeah,
it's
it's just
real, dramatically, it's really bad, but there's a lot of false stuff in it, which seems to be the reason why he wrote it. It's got, well, if I can advertise false stuff, I'm going to give them a lot of false stuff.
Yeah, and that seems to be all it was. And
Mm,
it's fun. It's just not good compared to of the four plays. This is of the four in this Henry ad. It's by far the
mm.
weakest. Um, and of all the history plays, it might be the second worst. Behind
And 6-1.
6-1. Yeah.
Yeah, Henry the Sixth Part 1. Audience, I don't think we're doing it, and you shouldn't read it.
Right.
But if you want a play in which Joan of Arc is
Talks to
talks to the
demons,
devil, or
and then
and is evil, please knock yourself out. It's I Henry.
she's really evil, and
Mhm.
she's pregnant when she gets burned at the stake, but she has no idea who the father is. It could be the Dauphin, it could be any of six
Yeah,
dukes of France, and yeah,
she's a
she
real
talks to demons, and
mhm.
it's
She's a real busy lady,
it's
as
a
we
really
say.
bad play.
Yeah, the English did not like the French. That's what you learned from this play. The English did not like the French.
Yeah, it's a bad
But
play. But anyway, this is a really good adaptation. People should watch it. Everyone should watch it. It's really good. If my kids are a little older, because I will have them watch this. It's really good. It's a great Shakespeare play.
and that moves us on to next week. What are we doing next week?
Henry V.
Henry the Fifth. That makes sense. Um, and
Two adaptations.
we are doing two.
Um,
We are doing Branagh
we're doing
and
Branagh's and Olivier's, which are so good side by side.
oh,
Totally different.
I don't
Have
think
you seen them?
I've seen them both, but not side by side.
Yeah, they're great to watch side by side. We did it when I was in college. I took a class on war and cinema, and we watched them side by side. It was great.
You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found.
Audience, next week we will be continuing the legacy of Prince Hal as we move on to Henry V, the play, and then the Laurence Olivier and Kenneth Branagh adaptations. Join us next time when we discuss that work. See you then.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week we'll be discussing Henry V. Pat, if you could play one role in this play, what would it be?
I would probably be either. I think I would be Fluellen. I like Fluellen. I would probably get cast as which I love in the Brand or the not the Brando one, the Olivier one with the Irishman. Oh, who says anything about my country? They're like, oh, they really don't like the Irish in this one.
They do not, no.
They do not like the Irish. Um,
Branagh, being an Irishman, has a little more hope for the Irish.
I suspect it was well, we can get into it why I think they're so harsh with the Irish. But so anyway, I like, I think I would be Fluellen, or I think it could be fun to be the king of France. I think that would also be a fun role. I would be either of those. I think those would be fun. I don't think I'd make a very good Hal. I'm not a very good war leader. So I think I would pass on that one. What about you, Tom?
I think I would be a good Exeter. And
Okay.
the Brian Blessed
He's
performance.
great. I
He's
love Brian Blessed. Yeah, he's great.
great. We'll see him later this season as the ghost of Hamlet's father.
Which that's such a shame because I love Brian Blessed and the fact that he only gets to be the ghost. It's such like he's really good as it when we get to him later, but it's such a small role, and I like more Brian Blessed in my movies.
Yeah, I know. He's such a great voice, but his version of Exeter, it's just,
Yeah.
I think why I would play it is I'm you audience, you can't see me. I'm a fairly large person, and the way he plays, he's just big. He's just a big voice. He's a big body. I don't get the impression he's overly intelligent, but he is loyal. He is the first person in the battle, and I feel like I convey that pretty well. So I think I would make a very good Exeter in this. And yes, I did think of you as Fluellen.
Yeah,
Pat.
I think I'd be a good
that would be a
Fluellen.
very
I think
good,
I'd be a good Fluellen.
very good role for you. That would be a lot of fun.